text will come from John chapter 15, leading into the text. In John 13, we see Christ meeting with the 12, his church, in the upper room. This upper room had been made ready for the Passover. Prior to this, the apostles had witnessed the triumphal entry of Christ into Jerusalem, the people lying in the streets, waving palm branches and shouting, "Hosanna" to the King. Even the chief priests, who had been plotting against Christ, cried out in despair, "What can we do? The whole world has gone after him." But Jesus, of course, knew exactly what the next few hours would bring. And in John 13, he tells the apostles that one of them would betray him. We read that in verse 21 of John 13. Judas, the one who would betray him, leaves the room in John 13, verse 30. The 11 that remained make an assumption as to why Judas left, and we see that in verse 29, where some of them thought because Judas had the bag that Jesus said unto him, "Buy those things which ye have need of against the feast." Jesus then speaks to the 11. Judas has left, telling them, to their absolute dismay, that he was going away. Speaking of the crucifixion. Where he was going, they could not follow. As a result, these who had spent the last 3.5 years with him, they're greatly alarmed, they're confused, there's an inward commotion, they're overtaken with fear and anxiety and distress. And in chapter 14, Jesus proceeds to comfort them, to calm and ease their fears, reassuring and encouraging them. And he begins by saying, "Let not your hearts be troubled." And he calls attention to himself. Believe in me. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in me. From this point to the end of the chapter, Jesus uses personal pronouns referring to himself. The word "I" 37 times. Myself 3 times. Me 22 times. My 11 times. Mine 1 time. 74 references in John 14 that he makes to himself. So he is the center of attention. Let not your hearts be troubled, and he draws their attention to himself. And that's the remedy for troubled hearts, and it's the way to prevent troubled hearts. After the institution of the Lord's Supper that night, the chapter closes, verse 31, with Christ saying, "Arise," that is, stand up, "let us go hence." And they leave the upper room, and they're now on the outside. And that brings us to our text. John 15, verses 1 through 9. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, He, my Father, taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, He purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch, and is withered. And men gather them, and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. So shall ye be my disciples. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Continue ye in my love. So these are the words of Christ to the 11 on the night of the Passover, the night of His arrest. And like all the words of Christ, they're full of meaning. They are a tremendous source of strength, tremendous source of comfort. Now in these verses, Jesus is instructing them concerning how they were to live their lives in the world. What we have here is instruction to a life of spiritual fruitfulness. He mentions the word fruit 8 times. Verse 2, verse 4, verse 5, verse 8, and then down in verse 16. To bear fruit conveys the idea of our manner of living is to be of benefit. It is to be of profit. Our lives are to produce. Our lives are to bring a return. They are to have a yield. They are to have a positive effect. This is what He's telling them. What Jesus said here to the 11 is the key to such a life. The main focus of what He says to them is verse 4. Abide in me. It's the only way you can bring forth fruit. Abide in me. And then the remainder of the text serves as incentive to abide in Him, or reasons why we should abide in Him. So our subject is incentive to abide in Christ. But first of all, the key to a spiritually productive life, verse 4, abide in me. This is both a command and it is also an invitation. Abide in me. It is essential to a spiritually fruitful and flourishing life. Abide in me. There is no spiritually fruitful and flourishing life without this. Abide in me. Nothing can replace this. Abide in me. These words are instructional, but again, they are also invitational. They are instructional and invitational to friendship with Him, to closeness with Him, to harmony and communication with Him. Abide in me. Again, it's a command. It's instruction. It's an invitation. It is a command, it is instruction, it is an invitation to remain or maintain a close friendship and communion with Him. Abide in me. Abide in me. This is both a privilege. How privileged we are to be able to abide in Him. It is also an opportunity. Abide in me. Abide in me. This is grace. This is mercy. That He would say to you and I, abide in me. It is a command to draw near. It is instruction to nearness to Him. It's an invitation to nearness to Him. Abide in me. That means dwell in me. Reside in me. Take up your residence in me. Remain in me. Be settled in me. Continue in me. Exist in me. It conveys the idea of constancy. Abide in me. This isn't an occasional visit, but abide in me. So we have that word abide. The word automatically necessitates a realm or a domain. There must be a place to abide. The very word necessitates that. And we hear Jesus say, abide in me. That's to be our realm of living. That's to be our domain. Him. He is the abiding place. Abide in me. He would not have told us that if He were not available to us. So the very words abide in me means that He is available. But it also means that He's accessible. That is, we can abide in Him. Abide in me. It is the same as Colossians 2 verse 7, rooted in Him. It's to be embedded, fixed, established in Him, connected with Him, linked with Him. The life that we are called to live does not have its roots in genealogy. The life that we are called to live does not have its roots in religion. It has its roots in Christ. And Jesus says, abide in me. That is, the life we are called to live is a life inseparable from Christ. So we hear Jesus say, abide in me. It is a life drawing from Him, as indicated from the vine and the branches. For a spiritually fruitful and flourishing life, Jesus says, abide in me. Abide in me. He is to be our dwelling. He is to be our existing place. It's a living connection, branch and vine. It is a harmony with Him. And the result of such is not only a fruitful and flourishing life, but there's a connection. And there's a closeness to Him. In verse 4, it is in me and I in you. In me and I in you. Connection. Verse 5. He that abideth in me, and I in him. Verse 7, if ye abide in me, and my words abide in you. So what we see here is a mutual relation. Abide in me, and I in you. It is living mutually with Him. That's to be our life. We are to live mutually with Him. Not apart from Him, but mutually with Him. That's Christianity. That's salvation. A vital, personal union with Him came into existence. And now Jesus says, abide in me. What He's saying is, live that personal union that came about in salvation. That was the work of God, that personal union. Now we are to live that union. And again, that is what it means to be a Christian. It is a union with Christ. It is living that union with Christ. We were joined to Christ at salvation by the miraculous work of God. Now we have a responsibility to live a life that corresponds to that joining with Christ. See, there are people who want you to believe that they are joined to Christ in salvation. But the problem is, their entire life is lived apart from Christ. There's no evidence that this joining ever took place. Jesus says, abide in me. Live life experiencing Him. Abide in me. That's enjoying Him. It's sitting at His feet. It's leaning upon Him. It's receiving from Him. All that's included in abide in me. Again, it is a command to have fellowship with Him. It is instruction. And it is an invitation to fellowship with Him. And this is the opportunity that we have to walk through life with Him. Abide in me. Abide in me. It is a call to be identified with Him in life. He is where we are to exist. We must feel, I can't exist without Him. I must abide in Him. It is a call for Him to be our reason for living. Abide in me. The result of this, verse 11, these things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. So in order to live the life that flows from Christ, abide in me. Abide in Him. No other way. Now, again, that's the main thing here. Abide in me. But there is incentive to do so. We have plenty of incentive to abide in Him. In verse 1, we hear Jesus say, I am. In verse 5, we see the same. I am. So what's He doing? He is presenting Himself. I am. Drawing attention to Himself. I am. Abide in me. He said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father, but by me. And in light of such, hear Jesus say, abide in me. I'm the way. Abide in me. I'm the truth. Abide in me. I'm the life. Abide in me. He says here at the beginning of our text, I am the true vine. Verse 5, I am the vine. He's saying, I'm the source. I'm the source of everything you need. In light of such, hear Him say, abide in me. That's incentive. To know that He is the source. I can't find this source anywhere else. He is the source. That should motivate me to abide in Him. That's our incentive. Because of who He is. You need no other reason to abide in Him other than who He is. Because of who He is. Abide in me. Another incentive, though we don't need it, we are absolutely dependent upon Him. See, the problem is, the reason God's people fail to abide in Him on a continual basis is they really do not believe that He is the source. Because if you believe that He is the source of everything you need, you're an utter fool if you don't abide in Him. So you have to admit one or two things. I'm a fool. Or I don't really believe that He's the source. Because if you really believe that, you won't need anyone to talk you into abiding in Him. Same here with the second thing. We are absolutely dependent upon Him. If we really believe that, we'll abide in Him. Verse 5 says, I am the vine, ye are the branches. And in verse 4, the branch cannot bear fruit of itself. So quit trying to do so. How many of God's people trying to produce their own fruit? The branch cannot bear fruit of itself. It's powerless to do so, except it abide in the vine. It is absolutely dependent upon the vine. And then he makes personal application. Again, it's common sense. I am the vine, you're the branch. The branch cannot bear fruit of itself. But then he said, except it abide in the vine, and then he says, no more can ye, except ye abide in me. What's he saying? He's saying, you need me. That's what he's saying. You need me. God doesn't need us. We need Him. You need me. And if we truly realize that, we will abide. Disconnected branches cannot bear fruit. They can't. They can only produce fruit by a living connection to Him, to the vine, to the source. He's our sufficiency. In light of such, hear Jesus say, abide in me. Abide in me. Jesus is not interested in being a supplement to our life. He's the source. And we are to relate to Him in all things. We can have a spiritually fruitful and flourishing life, but only as we abide in Him. And I've been listening to God's people make all kinds of excuses for a lot of years now on why they don't bear fruit, and they can come up with every reason but the real one, and that is a failure to abide. A failure to abide. All backsliding begins where you stopped abiding. You can blame it on whoever you want, but that won't fix it. The only thing that'll fix it is to get back to abiding in Him. Verse 8, He said, herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. It glorifies God that we bear fruit, and the only way we can bear fruit is to abide in Him. So therefore, abide in Him. It glorifies God. The result glorifies God. The third incentive is Christ's love for us. Verse 9. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. So have I loved you. The subject matter is His love for us in that verse. And this is within another subject matter. Abide in me. So He's saying in verse 9, I have loved you. Between the I and the you of verse 9, there's an act performed, loved. I is the doer or the performer of the act, and you is the object and the recipient of the act. Hath loved you. Have I loved you? To love is to hold dear, to cherish. There's a feeling of attachment, and there is a devotion. And Jesus says, I have loved you. The I and the you declare the wonder, the marvel, and the remarkableness of this love. He who is infinitely holy loved us. He whom the heavens cannot contain. He who is God, all-sufficient, and needs nothing of us, loved us. He whose glory is the astonishment of the most glorious beings, loved us. He who is God, the maker of heaven and earth, the Almighty, the all in all, loved us. So we hear Jesus say, I loved you. You who were guilty, who were depraved and unrighteous and unclean and wallowing in the power and pollution of sin. You who were estranged and cold and indifferent, filled with self-seeking and self-indulgence and self-importance. I have loved you. Oh, the wonder of it all. It was this love of Christ for us that moved Him to become poor, so that we, the poor, would become rich. You think what that love must have been, which brought the Lord of glory from heaven to become a man of sorrows for our sake. It was this love of Christ that moved Him to be despised and hated and ridiculed by sinful man. It was this love of Christ that moved Him to take our sins upon Himself and to be made sin and a curse for us. It was this love of Christ that moved Him to die the death of a felon between two thieves. It was this love of Christ that moved Him to give His life so that we could have life. It is truly a love that gave all. And it is a love that is unconditional. It is a love uninfluenced. That is, it is a love in spite of ourselves. It's the most amazing of all love. I have loved you. And the lover of our soul says, abide in me. Abide in me. Due to the fact that He provides for me, He cares for me, He thinks upon me, He watches over me, all those things ought to draw us to abide in Him. But nothing more than His love for us. Abide in me. What other incentive do you need? He who is higher and superior and over all loves me. He who is eternal and immortal loves me. He who is all-sufficient and needs nothing of me loves me. And He says, abide in me. Abide in me. He loves me. But then it says, as the Father, important word there, as the Father hath loved me, another important word, so. The as and so line up. So have I loved you. This is amazing. This is absolutely amazing. It is this love, as the Father hath loved me, that Christ uses to illustrate His love for us. It is an eternal love. The Father loves the Son eternally. It's forever. It's an immutable love. Perfect. Without pause. There's never been a pause in this love. It's an invincible love. It cannot be extinguished. It's infinite. It's immeasurable, incomprehensible. It is a particular love. Again, I, you. It's particular. It's personal. People like to view the love of the Lord in a general sense. You need to get beyond that. It's particular. It's personal. It's a love of delight. God the Father loves the Son. And He has full delight in His Son. And as the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Again, that's amazing. The Lord took delight in us. It is a special and peculiar love, as the Father hath loved me. So have I loved you. It is a powerful and fervent love. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. And this is the one who says to you and I, abide in me. Abide in me. A love so extensive, a love so absolute and so strong, that Jesus says, as the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Read it over and over and over again. Hear it over and over and over again. And it is this one that says, abide in me. Abide in me. What other incentive do you need? Abide in me. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. In light of such, abide in me. Abide in me is the key to the life that we are to live in this world. Abide in me. Dwell in me. Exist in me. The Lord is not to be viewed as in a fire escape. You're to exist in Him. Not just occasionally. You are to exist in Him. There's no Christian life outside of. Abide in me. This goes beyond formality. This goes beyond appearance. This goes beyond surface. God's people today want surface Christianity. First of all, there is no such thing. They just want the surface. Don't go too deep. Abide in me. This goes long beyond surface. God's people like theory. This goes beyond theory. Goes beyond opinion. Abide in me. It is a way of life. And oh, what a life flows from. Abide in me. Much fruit. Much fruit. The life that flows from abide in me is the best possible life you can have. There's no better life. Abide in me. It's the most productive. The most influential life that you can have. Abide in me. From this flows the most enjoyable life. Abide in me. It's the most peaceful life. It's the safest life. How can you be safer than abide in me? And it's the most useful. It's the most useful life. Abide in me. This is where we find strength. You can try to work up your own strength, or you can abide in Him and draw from His strength. It's where we find strength. It's where we find refreshment. It's where we find joy. Abide in me. It's where we find assurance. There's a great lack in all of these things. Strength, refreshment, joy, assurance. It all goes back to a failure to abide in Him. It's where we find encouragement. Abide in me. It's where we find contentment. It's where we find spiritual rejuvenation or revival. Abide in me. Quit looking in other places and hear Jesus say, abide in me. That's the answer. Abide in me. Oh, we need to hear Him say this throughout the day to you and I. Abide in me. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us